It was early March when I first noticed something was off. I'm 70 years old now, and I've lived long enough to recognize when something doesn't feel quite right. But it wasn't until I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, that the weight of it all hit me. My mind was already wandering through the thoughts of a simpler life, the years I spent working the factory floor, then the little business I built from scratch, and finally settling into retirement. But this new wrinkle in my life wasn't something I'd ever anticipated. My daughter, Elizabeth, came over with her husband, Greg. They've been married for a few years now, and while I've never been one to pry into their relationship, I can't say I've always been a fan of Greg. He's a little too slick for my liking, a little too smooth-talking, always putting on that polished smile like he was hiding something. But I kept my mouth shut for Elizabeth's sake. She's always been a soft-hearted woman, and she loves him, so I figured it was best to stay out of their business. The trouble started when Elizabeth casually mentioned to me that she'd noticed something odd on our bank statement. She didn't give me any more details, but I could see the unease on her face. A couple of days later, I found myself sitting across from my bank manager, Greg, at my side, and my stomach twisting in knots. Something didn't feel right. The bank manager, a young woman named Amy, looked down at the screen on her computer and hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Hawkins, it seems there was a large loan taken out in your name, recently." I wasn't sure what she meant at first. A loan? I didn't apply for any loan. Greg, sitting beside me, shifted in his seat. His expression was unreadable, but I could sense a certain discomfort. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, it seems almost too obvious now. Amy typed a few more things into the computer before continuing. "Yes, it was for $300,000. A personal loan. And the application was signed by you." I blinked at her, my heart beginning to race. "Signed by me?" I repeated, voice cracking. "I didn't sign anything." Greg coughed, and I turned to him. There was a nervous energy about him that I couldn't ignore. I thought back to the last few months, the small changes in his behavior, the way he had become more distant, always wrapped up in work, always promising things were going well at the office. But now, sitting in that bank, the weight of the truth began to settle into my bones. Amy's eyes darted between me and Greg. "We have a copy of the signature here, Mr. Hawkins. And it matches the one on your file." I felt my chest tighten. A flood of confusion rushed over me, but there was no denying it. My signature, at least, the one they had on file, was there, clear as day. But I hadn't signed anything. Not a single piece of paper. I turned to Greg. "What's going on here?" My voice was low, but I could feel the anger starting to build. Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I don't know what to say. Maybe there's been some kind of mistake." "Mistake?" A $300,000 loan was no mistake. I could feel my pulse quickening as the realization began to sink in. Someone was playing me for a fool. Someone had taken advantage of me, and I was starting to put the pieces together. Amy seemed to sense the tension in the room, her voice becoming more hesitant. "Mr. Hawkins, it might be helpful if you take a look at the documents we have on file. You can see the application here, along with the signed agreement." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. "I don't need to see any documents. I'm telling you right now, I didn't sign anything." Greg's eyes darted nervously. "Dad, calm down. It's probably just a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? My mind raced as I thought back to the last few months. How could I have missed this? Greg had been helping me with the paperwork for the house, we had even refinanced a couple of things together. But I had trusted him. I had trusted him with everything. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. I glanced at the bank manager again. "I want to see those documents, Amy. I need to see them." She nodded, tapping a few more things into her computer before standing up and walking over to a nearby filing cabinet. She pulled out a thick stack of papers and handed them to me. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, scanning the pages, looking for something that would make sense. And then I saw it. There, at the bottom of the page, was my signature. It looked like my handwriting, sure. But something was off. The way it was slanted, the slight curve at the end of the H in Hawkins, it wasn't quite right. I looked closer, and that's when the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't my signature at all. Someone had forged it. I looked up at Greg, and everything I had been holding in, all the confusion, all the betrayal, finally bubbled to the surface. "You did this, didn't you?" I said, my voice low but sharp. Greg's face paled. "Dad, I swear, I didn't." "Don't lie to me." I snapped, the fury in my voice rising. "This is your doing, isn't it? You've been playing me all along." Greg's eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "You've been using me, haven't you? Taking advantage of my trust. You signed my name. You got yourself a loan for $300,000, and now you think you can just walk away from it?" Greg's jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "It wasn't like that, Dad. I was just trying to help out. I needed the money, and I didn't know how else to get it." I shook my head in disbelief. "You think I'm that stupid? That I wouldn't find out? You've been taking advantage of me, and now you're trying to play the victim?" My blood was boiling. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that my own son-in-law had done this to me or the realization that I had let him get this far. Greg tried to backpedal. "Dad, please, I can explain. It wasn't like you think." I stood up, the papers still in my hands, and slammed them onto the table. "Don't explain a damn thing. You're going to pay for this. You're going to pay for everything." But what could I do? How could I prove it? The loan was already in place, and there was nothing I could do to take it back. Not unless I had something concrete that could bring the truth to light. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let him get away with it. It was time to fight back. Time to show Greg that he wouldn't walk away from this unscathed. The next day, I made a call to a lawyer. I was going to get to the bottom of this, and I wasn't going to rest until Greg paid for what he'd done. The battle had just begun. The days that followed felt like an endless blur of anger, frustration, and the cold weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I spent hours each day going over the documents from the bank, looking for something, anything, that could prove Greg had forged my signature. The more I looked at those papers, the more certain I became. I hadn't signed a single one of them. But without solid proof, I was stuck in a corner, and Greg knew it. Elizabeth, my daughter, tried to calm me down, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She had no idea what Greg had done, or at least she didn't want to believe it. She kept saying, "Dad, Greg wouldn't do that. He's just under a lot of stress." But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was just trying to hold on to the life she had built with him, a life that now seemed so built on lies. It was Friday afternoon when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had reached out to a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, who had a reputation for handling cases like mine. She'd been recommended by a friend of mine who had been through a similar ordeal. She'd assured me she could help, but after a few calls back and forth, I was starting to wonder if I was just wasting more time. But I couldn't sit idly by, and I knew Greg wasn't going to make it easy for me. So, I did what I've always done in tough situations. I took matters into my own hands. The first step was simple: get the bank's records. I called Amy, the manager who'd first broken the news to me, and asked for a meeting. She was hesitant, but I convinced her it would be for the best if we could clear up the misunderstanding, even though I knew there wasn't any misunderstanding at all. She reluctantly agreed to meet at the branch the next morning. As I sat at my kitchen table that night, going over the documents again, I couldn't help but think about how everything had changed so quickly. Just a few months ago, everything seemed fine. Elizabeth and Greg were planning on buying a house, and I was looking forward to spending my retirement years in peace. Now, I was facing the biggest fight of my life. The thought that Greg had been playing me for a fool, that he'd been pretending to care about me while plotting behind my back, it was unbearable. The next morning, I arrived at the bank early. The branches were quiet at this hour, but I could feel the anxiety building inside me. Amy was waiting in her office, looking as nervous as I felt. "Mr. Hawkins, thank you for coming," she said, motioning for me to sit. "I think it's best we get this cleared up. I've pulled all the relevant documents for you." I nodded. "I appreciate that, Amy. But I'm not here to clear up a misunderstanding. I'm here to find out the truth." Amy's face softened, but I could tell she was on edge. "I understand. Let's take a look." She opened a file on her desk and handed me a folder. Inside were copies of the loan application, the signature page, and the terms of the loan. I scanned each page carefully, but my eyes kept going back to the signature. The more I looked at it, the more certain I became, it wasn't mine. "I need to see the original documents," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Not copies. The originals." Amy hesitated but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Hawkins. I'll get them for you." She returned a few minutes later with the originals, still in a manila folder. When she handed them over, I felt a rush of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd find something that would prove Greg's deceit. I examined each page, but the signature still looked identical to mine. My gut told me something wasn't right. It had been forged, but the question was, how? Had Greg somehow gained access to my personal information? Had he somehow figured out how to mimic my handwriting so well that it could fool anyone? I needed something more. I needed proof that Greg had forged the signature himself. That's when it hit me. I hadn't signed anything in person. Not for months. My signature was always handled electronically for the past few years, through emails or secure online platforms. If someone had physically signed my name on a loan application, they'd had to be in my home or my office. A sudden, bitter thought crossed my mind: what if Greg had done this in the middle of one of those moments when he was supposedly helping me out with paperwork? What if he had simply waited for me to be distracted, thinking I was trusting him, and then forged the signature when I wasn't looking? "I want to see the security footage," I said suddenly, a new fire in my chest. "From the day the application was signed." Amy's eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw something like fear in her gaze. She quickly recovered, but I didn't miss it. "Mr. Hawkins, I'm not sure if that's possible. We don't typically keep footage for this long." "I want it," I said again, more forcefully this time. "It's my right to know who's been tampering with my account. You'll get me the footage." Amy opened her mouth to protest, but then something in her expression shifted, as though she recognized the gravity of the situation. "All right," she said, standing up and walking out of the room. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but it wasn't long before Amy came back with a thumb drive. "I've managed to pull the footage you requested," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's not a lot, but it's something." I took the drive from her without saying a word, my mind already racing ahead to the next step. There was no way Greg could cover his tracks now. If he was the one who forged my signature, there would be evidence. As I walked out of the bank, the weight of the drive in my pocket felt like a heavy burden. I knew I was getting closer to the truth. And when I found it, there would be no going back for Greg. No more lies. No more pretending. He would pay for what he'd done. And the law would make sure of it. The drive back home was a blur. I didn't focus on the streets, the passing cars, or even the usual sights of the neighborhood. My mind was consumed with what I had just seen. The bank footage could be the key. I didn't know for sure, but the suspicion I'd had for months was starting to feel like a certainty. I didn't know what Greg's next move would be, but I was ready for him. When I got inside, I immediately plugged the thumb drive into my computer and opened the footage. It took a few moments to load, and I felt the anticipation build in my chest. What I saw first was nothing special, just a few days of routine bank activity, people walking in and out of the branch, employees going about their business. But then, as I fast-forwarded to the date in question, I spotted something. There he was. Greg. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was walking into the bank in the footage, dressed in a sharp suit, carrying himself with that same confident, practiced air he always had when he wanted to impress someone. He stood at the counter, spoke to the teller for a few minutes, and then, just like that, he was sitting at a desk with a bank officer. I rewound the footage to catch more of the conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but it didn't matter. I saw Greg signing something. The motion was familiar, just like when he'd helped me with my papers before. But I wasn't an idiot, I could see it now. He was signing my name. My blood ran cold. I kept watching, my finger frozen on the mouse, waiting for some kind of confirmation, waiting to see if he'd done anything else. Sure enough, a few moments later, he handed the documents back to the officer, and they shook hands. He was walking out of the branch with a smile on his face, clearly satisfied. I could barely believe it. The footage was damning. There was no question now. Greg had forged my signature on that loan application. And what's more, he'd done it right under my nose, using my own trust against me. I couldn't sit still any longer. I needed to confront him. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about the loan or the house or any of the material things that Greg had taken. It was about the betrayal. The complete disregard for our family, for me. He had used my name without my permission. He had taken something that wasn't his and had tried to cover it up like it was nothing. I called Claire, the lawyer I'd contacted earlier. I knew she would be the one to help me take this to the next level. "You have the footage, don't you?" she asked when I explained the situation. "I do," I replied, my voice tight. "And it's all right there. Greg's in the bank. He signed the loan application with my name." Claire was silent for a moment, and then she spoke again, her tone calm but decisive. "This is the breakthrough you needed. Now, we can start taking action. I'll need a copy of the footage and all the bank records you have. We'll build a case around this." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I'll send everything over to you immediately." I had to act fast. Greg would realize soon enough that I was onto him. But he wasn't getting away with it. Not this time. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, emails, and legal paperwork. Claire worked quickly, already preparing the case for what was sure to be a messy battle. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control. I wasn't just sitting back, letting Greg get away with everything. I was standing up. When Elizabeth came over that evening, I could tell she was anxious. She had a hard time meeting my eyes, like she knew something was wrong but didn't know how to address it. She wasn't yet aware of everything that had transpired. "Dad, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft. I glanced up at her, feeling the weight of the truth hanging between us. "No, Liz, everything's not all right. But it will be soon." She sat down beside me, concern etched across her face. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I hadn't wanted to drag her into this mess, but now, there was no avoiding it. She needed to know. "It's Greg," I said finally. "He forged my signature and took out a $300,000 loan from the bank." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Her hands clenched in her lap, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She was trying to process what I had just said, but I could tell she didn't want to believe it. That's impossible," she whispered, shaking her head. He wouldn't do that. He's family. I could feel my frustration bubbling up again. That's exactly why I didn't see it coming. Because he's family. But I have the proof now, Liz. I have the footage. I took a deep breath and showed her the video I had gotten from the bank. The moment Greg walked into the branch, signed the loan papers, and walked out with that smug look on his face. She watched in silence, her face going from disbelief to shock as the footage played. By the time it finished, her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, my voice softer now. "But it's true. And we have to do something about it." Elizabeth's face twisted in anguish, and I could see the anger building in her eyes. "I'm going to talk to him. I have to. I need to hear it from him." I shook my head. "No, Liz. It's not safe. Not now. Let me handle it. He's going to have to answer for this in court. I'm not letting him get away with it." She nodded slowly, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She wanted to protect Greg, but the truth was already out, and there was no going back now. The next day, Claire called with good news. She had already set up a meeting with the bank's legal team. It was time to move forward, to make Greg pay for what he'd done, and to reclaim the justice that had been taken from me. But Greg wasn't going to make it easy. The days that followed were filled with a sense of building tension. The clock was ticking down to the meeting with the bank's legal team, and every minute felt like a countdown to a confrontation that would change everything. I didn't know what Greg would do next, but I knew it was coming. He wasn't going to let me walk away from this quietly. He had too much at stake now, too much to lose. But I wasn't about to let him walk away scot-free. He had messed with the wrong person. Claire, my lawyer, had prepared everything. She had secured the necessary documents, the video footage, and all the bank records to support our case. She even set up a meeting with a private investigator to dig into Greg's financial dealings, hoping to find more evidence that would tie him to other shady activities. I was done sitting back. Greg had done this to me, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I had to fight back, and I was ready. But before the big day arrived, Elizabeth came to see me again. I could tell something was different about her. Her face was tense, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept. She'd been struggling with the reality of what Greg had done, but now, she was determined to confront him. "Dad, I've made up my mind," she said, sitting down beside me. "I'm going to talk to Greg. I'm going to make him admit it. I'm not letting him get away with this either." I looked at her, conflicted. I understood why she felt the need to confront him, but this wasn't something I wanted her to do alone. "Elizabeth," I said quietly, "you don't have to do this. Let's handle this in court. Greg doesn't need to be given a chance to talk his way out of it." She shook her head. "No, Dad. I need to hear it from him. I need him to tell me to my face that he did this to you. I need to know that he's really the person I think he is. I don't want to go into this blindly anymore." I could see the hurt in her eyes, and I understood. She had been torn between loyalty to her husband and the reality of the man he had become. This wasn't easy for her, but it had to be done. "All right," I said, though I wasn't thrilled about the idea. "But be careful, Liz. Don't give him any room to twist things around. He's good at that, and he's a master at lying his way out of things." She nodded, a determined look in her eyes. "I'm done letting him control me. I'm going to get the truth, one way or another." I didn't have time to worry about it anymore. The meeting with the bank's legal team was set for the following afternoon, and I needed to stay focused. It was time for Greg to face the consequences of his actions. The bank had been notified, the evidence was in place, and Claire had arranged everything to ensure we had a strong case. I wasn't going to back down. That afternoon, I arrived at the bank's headquarters, a sleek building that seemed to glow with wealth and power. I walked into the conference room, where Claire was already waiting. The lawyers from the bank arrived shortly after, all sharp suits and calculating eyes, trying to look professional while keeping their guard up. They knew they were about to face a storm. "Mr. Hawkins," one of the lawyers began, offering a handshake. "We've reviewed the evidence you've provided. I have to admit, it's quite compelling." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I sat down, leaning forward, my eyes focused. "You don't need to tell me it's compelling. I know what I'm looking at. But now, I want you to make it right." The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're fully prepared to investigate this matter thoroughly. But there are a few things that need to be done before we can proceed with any formal actions. We'll need to confirm everything with the original loan officers, verify the signatures, and we may need to go through the legal process to void the loan." I nodded. That was what I wanted to hear. The wheels were finally in motion. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. As we continued to talk about the next steps, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. It wasn't just about the money, it was about justice. Greg had thought he could get away with it, that he could use me for his own gain without facing any repercussions. But he was wrong. After the meeting, Claire and I left the building together. I felt the weight of everything that had happened finally starting to lift off my shoulders, but I knew the real battle was still ahead. I wasn't done yet. The next day, I got a call from Elizabeth. "I did it, Dad," she said, her voice tight but firm. I confronted him. And he admitted it. My heart skipped a beat. "What?" She let out a deep breath. "I got him to admit it. He said he forged your signature on the loan application. He said he needed the money, and he didn't know how else to get it. He said he thought he could fix it later, but I knew. I knew he was lying." I was stunned. Part of me wanted to feel a sense of relief, but instead, I just felt anger. Greg had admitted it to Elizabeth, but he hadn't been forced to face the consequences yet. "What did you do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I told him I was done. I told him I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. He's a liar and a thief, and he's not the man I thought he was." "Good for you," I said, a sense of pride rising in me. "But now, we've got to make sure he faces the consequences. No more excuses. No more second chances." The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and preparation for the court hearings. Everything was moving faster than I had anticipated. Greg was finally going to face what he had done. He wouldn't be able to talk his way out of this one. As we approached the day of the court hearing, I couldn't help but think back on everything that had led to this point. All the sleepless nights, all the frustration, all the anger I had bottled up inside, everything had led me here. It wasn't just about the money or the loan anymore. It was about standing up for myself, standing up for what was right, and making sure that Greg paid for the deceit he had caused. And when the time came, when the courtroom doors opened and Greg walked in, I would be ready. The courtroom was cold. The sterile, imposing walls of the courthouse felt like they were closing in on me as I sat there in my suit, waiting for the proceedings to begin. The air was thick with tension, every moment stretching into eternity. This was the culmination of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the deceit, and now it was time for Greg to face the music. I had never been one for drama. I'd lived most of my life quietly, working hard, keeping my head down, and making do. But this was different. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about standing up for what was right, about ensuring that Greg didn't get away with what he'd done. Elizabeth was sitting beside me, her hand tightly clutching mine. Her face was pale, and I could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a spark of resolve. She had been through so much with Greg, but now, she was here for me, supporting me, ready to see justice done. It was hard to look at her without feeling a pang of guilt. She had been dragged into this mess, and all because of the man she had married. We sat in silence for a while, waiting for the judge to arrive, and then the doors to the courtroom opened, and I saw Greg walking in. He was wearing that same polished suit, that same smug expression on his face. He walked with a certain confidence, as though he still believed he could talk his way out of this. I couldn't look at him without feeling disgust rise in my throat. How could he stand there, knowing what he'd done to me, to his own family, and act as though he hadn't destroyed everything? The judge entered, and the room fell silent. He was a no-nonsense man, with a sharp gaze and a voice that could cut through anything. I knew that he wouldn't let Greg get away with anything. But the weight of the proceedings hung heavy in the air. The lawyer for the bank sat at one table, while Claire and I sat at the other. The tension was palpable. The judge spoke, his voice booming through the room. We are here today to address the allegations brought forward by Mr. Hawkins regarding the fraudulent loan taken out in his name. Mr. Hawkins has presented evidence that his signature was forged, and we will now hear the case. I took a deep breath and stood, walking up to the stand with Claire by my side. The weight of everything, the anger, the hurt, the frustration, felt like it was pressing down on me, but I had to hold it together. I couldn't let Greg see me falter. Not now. As I sat down on the witness chair, I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. The bank's lawyer started the questioning, his voice calm but probing. Mr. Hawkins, he began, you claim that your signature was forged on a loan application for $300,000. Do you have any evidence to support this claim? I took a steadying breath, then nodded. Yes, I do. I have the bank's records, which show the loan was taken out in my name without my knowledge or consent. I also have video footage from the bank showing my son-in-law, Greg Hawkins, signing the loan application with my name. The room was still as I presented the evidence, watching closely as I handed over the documents. The lawyer for the bank carefully reviewed everything, then nodded, signaling that the evidence was indeed valid. The judge turned his gaze toward Greg, who was sitting across the room, trying to remain composed. His lawyer stood and raised his hand, signaling that they were ready to cross-examine me. Greg's lawyer was a smooth talker, trying to twist the situation in his favor, but I wasn't going to let him. Mr. Hawkins, Greg's lawyer began, you claim that your signature was forged. However, we have evidence from the bank showing that you signed the loan application in person. Could you explain why your signature matches the one on file? I glanced at Greg, who was watching me intently, trying to keep a neutral expression. I don't know how it matches, I replied. But I know for a fact that I didn't sign that loan application. I didn't give anyone permission to use my name for that. My signature has been forged, and I have no idea how or when it happened, but I know it wasn't me who did it. Greg's lawyer continued to press, trying to poke holes in my story, but Claire was there, her voice calm and collected, providing solid responses to every accusation. The tension in the room was mounting as the questioning continued. Greg's lawyer made one final attempt to discredit me. But Mr. Hawkins, he said, isn't it possible that your signature was simply a mistake? That you signed it without remembering? I shook my head. No. It's not possible. I didn't sign it. And I know Greg forged my signature. I know he took out that loan in my name without my permission, and I want him to be held accountable for it. The judge watched us closely, then turned to Greg, his voice firm. Mr. Hawkins, he said, addressing Greg for the first time, how do you respond to these allegations? Greg stood up slowly, his face pale but still trying to maintain control. He cleared his throat before speaking. Your Honor, he said, his voice wavering slightly, I didn't mean for things to go this far. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could get the money, pay it back, and nobody would notice. But things spiraled out of control. I made a mistake. I admit that I took out the loan in Mr. Hawkins' name, but I didn't think it would hurt anyone. I never meant for this to become a bigger issue. The room was silent as Greg's words hung in the air. He was trying to play the victim, trying to make it sound like it was all just a mistake, something that got out of hand. But I could see through it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't regretful. He was just trying to protect himself. The judge didn't miss a beat. "Mr. Hawkins, your actions were not a simple mistake. You forged a signature to take out a significant sum of money without the knowledge or consent of the person whose name you used. This is not a matter of an unfortunate misunderstanding, this is fraud. And you will be held accountable for your actions." Greg's face drained of color as the weight of the judge's words hit him. For the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in his eyes. The judge continued, "I will allow the bank's legal team to begin the process of voiding the loan and recovering the funds. As for you, Mr. Hawkins, this case will be turned over to criminal court for further investigation into the fraud and identity theft. You will be facing serious legal consequences." Greg's lawyer tried to protest, but it was clear that the case was over. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge wasn't buying Greg's flimsy excuses. As the proceedings came to a close, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Greg was going to pay for what he'd done. He had deceived not just me but his own wife, his own family, and now, he would face the consequences. As we left the courtroom, Elizabeth turned to me, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," she said softly. "It's over," I replied. "And now, we can finally move on." Greg may have thought he could get away with it, but justice had a way of catching up with people like him. And today, it caught him. The days that followed the court hearing felt like a long exhale, as though the entire world had been holding its breath and finally let go. But even though the case had been settled in my favor, the sense of victory didn't come easily. There was no celebration, no elation. Instead, there was a strange quietness that seemed to have settled over everything. Greg had been exposed, his fraudulent actions laid bare for everyone to see, but the consequences he now faced were far from over. The fallout from the court case hit Greg hard. After the hearing, he was officially charged with identity theft, fraud, and forgery, and the charges weren't light. His criminal case was soon transferred to the district court for further investigation. The bank was in the process of recovering the stolen $300,000, and Greg's assets were being seized as part of the restitution. As the legal process moved forward, I could tell he was no longer the confident, arrogant man who had once sat at my kitchen table, flashing his perfect smile and pretending to care about my well-being. Now, he was a shell of the man I had once welcomed into my family. But it wasn't just Greg who was feeling the weight of his actions. Elizabeth, my daughter, was facing the wreckage of everything she had built with him. For years, she had tried to keep the peace between Greg and me, hoping that somehow everything would resolve itself. She had ignored the warning signs, trusting in the man she had married, but now the truth was inescapable. The damage to their relationship was irreversible, and no amount of apologies from Greg could undo the hurt he had caused. I still remember the conversation we had a week after the court hearing. Elizabeth came over, her face drawn with exhaustion, her eyes still carrying the weight of the betrayal she had just uncovered. "Dad, I don't know what to do anymore," she said softly as she sat down at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap. "Greg, he's not who I thought he was. I'm struggling to even look at him." I could see the heartbreak in her eyes, and it broke my heart too. This wasn't the life I had wanted for her. She had been through so much, and now, she was facing the painful reality that the man she had loved, the man she had built her life with, was a liar and a criminal. "You don't have to figure it all out right now, Liz," I said gently, putting a hand on hers. "You need to take care of yourself. Take time. Whatever happens with Greg, you have to do what's right for you. And you don't owe him anything." She wiped away a tear, but I could see the strength in her that I hadn't noticed before. "I know. But how do I let go of everything we built together? I thought I knew him. I thought we were a team. And now, I just feel so stupid." Don't, I said firmly. You're not stupid. You trusted him. But now, you know the truth. And sometimes, the hardest thing in the world is seeing the person you thought you knew for who they really are. She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. She wasn't sure where to go from here, but I knew it would take time. The road ahead would be long, and the wounds Greg had inflicted on her, on all of us, would take time to heal. As for Greg, the fallout wasn't just personal. It was professional too. He lost his job at the firm where he had worked for years. The company issued a statement saying they had been unaware of his criminal actions and that they were severing all ties with him. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his choices. His so-called friends disappeared one by one, as they all distanced themselves from him. In the end, Greg was left alone, with only his lies to keep him company. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not for a second. He had brought this on himself. But I did feel a sense of justice, a satisfaction that, despite everything, he was paying the price for his actions. Elizabeth eventually decided to separate from him. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of courage for her to finally walk away, but she did. She moved into a small apartment, one where she could rebuild her life, find herself again, and heal from the betrayal that had shattered everything she thought she knew about love and trust. As for me, I continued on with my life. The fight with Greg had taken more out of me than I had expected, but I knew I had done the right thing. I had stood up for myself, for my family, and for the truth. And while the scars would remain, I also knew that I had finally found peace. The legal battle had been brutal, but the victory was sweet. And even though the whole ordeal had strained my relationship with Elizabeth, in the end, I think it made us stronger. She learned the hard way that people aren't always who they seem to be, but she also learned the importance of trust, honesty, and, above all, standing up for yourself. In the weeks that followed, I received an unexpected letter from Greg. It was an apology of sorts, though it was clear that it was just a last-ditch effort to salvage what little he had left. It wasn't a letter that deserved a response. I threw it away without a second thought. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out. Greg had tried to steal from me, to use my name, and to destroy my family, but in the end, he was the one who lost everything. And now, I could finally move on, knowing that the justice I had fought for had been served. I spent the following months trying to enjoy the little things in life. Spending more time with Elizabeth as she rebuilt her life, taking long walks in the park, and finally starting to take care of myself again. Life had been hard, but it wasn't over. There was still time for new beginnings, and after everything that had happened, I was ready to embrace them. It took a long time for Elizabeth to heal, but over time, she found strength. And though the scars of betrayal never fully fade, I knew she would be okay. As for me, I had learned the hard way that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most, but with resilience, we can face anything. In the end, I didn't just win the battle. I reclaimed my peace, my dignity, and my family's future. The past was behind me, and I could look forward to whatever came next with a clear conscience. Greg had made his choices, but I was the one who had chosen to rise above it all. And that, I knew, was something no one could ever take from me. Author's note. Sometimes, the hardest part of a fight is standing up for what's right. Greg's actions were selfish and deceitful, but in the end, justice found its way, not through revenge, but through persistence and the truth. This story serves as a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there is power in choosing the high road. And while the scars of a broken trust may remain, they don't define us.